Welcome to this episode of the Biology of Trauma podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Aimie. Have you ever wondered why success doesn't automatically translate to feeling fulfilled? Or why, despite all of our achievements, there's still that nagging feeling that we need to prove ourselves? Well, today's episode, sharing an adoption story, might just explain why. I'm sitting down with JJ Virgin, who many of you know is a leading voice in nutrition and health, but we're not here to talk about diet, exercise, or supplements. You can go to her Instagram for that. Instead, JJ is sharing a deeply personal story that is part of her reason for her remarkable professional success. In this episode, she talks openly about the challenges of growing up, feeling like she had to rely only on herself, how those feelings drove her to professional success, and the breakthroughs she's experienced that have helped her heal old wounds, become a proud mom, and find love. And yet, this conversation isn't just for those who have been adopted, though it will help you understand yourself better if you have, and if you have someone in your life who's been adopted. Rather, this episode is about recognizing the unconscious pain that we carry from childhood. How do I know that this is an important topic for today? Did you know that over 80% of Americans report feeling like they're not good enough in some area of their lives? Or that nearly 75% of adults struggle with trust issues in relationships? Or that feelings of isolation have reached epidemic levels, with 61% of Americans reporting feeling lonely. Understanding the root of these challenges has never been more crucial, whether for ourselves or those we help. Until they become conscious, they will continue to drive our lives. In this episode, we answer the question, what are common beliefs we form about ourselves that leave us unable to connect, trust, and receive love as adults? In this episode, we will learn how early experiences shape our beliefs about love, trust, and self-worth, the conundrum of relying on ourselves, simple ways to build trust and healing when we haven't been able to trust others, and how to better support those in your life who have a history of being adopted. Whether you've struggled with feeling unlovable, have an adopted child, or are just trying to understand yourself better, this conversation has the power to change the way you think about belonging and love. Let's dive in. Today, it's not so much a diagnosis as an experience. And this experience of being adopted, there's this other side, and being able to understand the other side and being able to understand all of the different facets that can go on with the mindset, the beliefs, what we have to overcome if you've gone through those experiences. And that's what we're going to go through today. JJ, tell me about what it was like. What was it like being adopted?
I was always told, like from early on, I can never not remember knowing I was adopted. And what my parents told me was that I was extra special because more people loved me. They loved me so much that they were willing to give me to someone else. Now, when the person who's supposed to be there and protect you the most gives you away, at the very start, I will tell you that still to this day, it makes you think that you are not lovable. And I've always felt that the only person I could ever count on was me. I could only rely on was me. And that if I just was good enough, they would love me. And so you look at people who are like this and you go, because I know with adopted kids, they tend to go one way or the other. They're either like in a ditch somewhere, drug addicts, or they're like crazy successful. And I think a lot of it is just that, I'll just do more and they'll love me. I'll do more and they'll love me. I'll do more, like this proving. Now, the crazy thing is when you get all through this is that my adopted mom, my mom has the ability, and she has shown it. And I didn't recognize it until I was deep in a meditation where I realized she is the epitome of unconditional love. Because I'm adopted and I have an adopted brother who's 2 years older than me, and he is profoundly schizophrenic. And watching what my mom has done with this now man is just amazing, right? I mean, the amount of unconditional love she's shown for both of us has been incredible, but I just didn't recognize it until literally like probably a couple months ago.
So a lot of your self-driven behaviors in your career, you're attributing to this feeling that you've only got yourself to depend on. Like you can really only trust yourself.
When I was little, I used to have these horrible tantrums. And I remember once I was in a store and I was having a tantrum, and my dad literally said to me, knock it off or I'm going to give you I'll give you back. And I can only speak for me, but I've talked to a couple other adopted kids. I think there's always this thing of like, you know, could that happen? And once someone says that to you, you always are like, all right, I better be able to take care of myself. Better be able to take care of myself. And so I was always driven. I can never remember not being driven. Now, was that genetics? I'll tell you an interesting story about meeting my birth parents. Or was that actually just that feeling of like, I have to rely on myself? I don't know. But it did get in the way of real relationships. I finally let myself fall in love at 51 years old. And prior to that, my relationships, I chose people that I knew would never really get in, right? Like I could keep myself protected. And then I finally got to enough of a point where I was like, okay, but it took a while. Like I had to overcome the feeling that I'm going to bolt. I was like, I better run away from this, right? So it takes a while because if you feel like you're not lovable, guess what? Your perceptions become reality. So I think you hear these amazing stories when people are reunited with their birth families, but the reality is it's very interesting to see what your genetics are, because I went, I have one side of the family who are like athletes, models, scientists, and entrepreneurs. Like one side's entrepreneurs and models and athletes, and one side's scientists. And I go, I get it. Everything, all my interests and everything else made sense. But there wasn't any place for me there. And feeling like you finally found those people who would love you unconditionally. Oh no, like that definitely didn't happen either. So I think one of the challenges with adoption, especially when, my parents are just very kind, nice people. My mom is, again, the epitome of someone has the ability to show unconditional love. It sounds very entitled and snotty and ridiculous to complain about. You've got people who are starving, people who are have abusive households. And so I never ever saw this as a thing. And I certainly wasn't going to talk about it because it sounds like you're complaining about this. You have it so good, right? But the reality is when these things happen, there is, it does leave a dent. It leaves a mark. It makes you wonder, if the person who's supposed to love you most is glad again that they gave you away. Right?
He affirmed that.
Oh yeah. So now she's really sure. She wasn't sure before. And I kept thinking, and as I did more and more things, and I mean, I'm out in the world, I'm like, surely you're seeing me. I'm on Dr. Phil every week. I've got these PBS shows, and I'm thinking none of them are getting in touch with me. But here's a couple big takeaways. It's like, if people have to love you for what you become, not who you are, what the heck? Right? Versus you have right in front of you this mom who's so proud of who you've become, but loves you for who you are. Right in front. But it took me until all of a sudden, being deep in a meditation, because I was at a Dr. Joe event and they were doing coherence healing. And I'm like, why is my womb and my heart vibrating and contracting? And I'm like, it's like, oh, I get it.
Yeah. So walk me through what have been some of the other pivotal moments in your life where it's like you were able to go one layer deeper.
Yeah, I would say until I really started doing this meditation work, I didn't get it. And I would even say that probably the reason I wasn't doing this meditation work was because I didn't want to sit still with myself. It really has only been over the last year of sitting and starting to do this meditation and just going, and up until then, I knew it was there and I kept talking about it, and I did 40 years of Zen and it came up, and, Dave asked me, so I was like, you need to address that. I'm like, I know, but I don't know what to do past recognizing it's a thing out there. So I think for years I've noticed a thing, but I didn't know what to do with the thing. It's kind of like you have a gaping wound and it's just not quite healing. And you're like, I'll just put a Band-Aid over it, but it's not going away, but you got it covered at least. So people aren't going, oh my God, look at that. But it's still there, right? Now I feel like it's pretty well scabbed over. It's still there. And I don't know, it'll always have a scar. However, and again, maybe this is fresh because as I was telling you before, we went to Elton John's concert last night and we rewatched his Rocket Man biography the night before. And, you sit there and hear how his mom's saying, I wish I'd never had you. And the dad was such a jerk. And watching him last night, you actually could still see it in his face, like how much he would come out and get the applause and you could see it all on his face, that feeling of, oh my gosh, they love me and the need for that. Right. And you go, well, would Elton John be Elton John without it? And so what if these things that seem like the worst thing that ever happened to you are the best thing that ever happened to you? Like, I have a son who had a severe traumatic brain injury. And prior to that had, bipolar disorder, but I could handle it because of how I was raised. I'd already seen it. I'd seen modeled how to handle these things. Right. So, it's like, do you become great because your life was easy, or do you become great through the challenges? I believe that we're never better than when we're challenged, and that people become great when they go through challenges. And then they'll look back and go, what can I learn from that? So again, I kind of, the thing we were talking about today, would Elton John be Elton John without that story? Or would he just be another guy, husband, maybe a piano teacher somewhere and not Elton John? I don't know that I would have done the things that I'd done if I was like, maybe I'd just be a happy homemaker, which would be fine too. As long as you're happy.
Right, exactly. No judgment on that. What I see that you've done, JJ, is you have really intentionally created, wherever you've gone, it's like you've created a family. You've created a community that feels like where people belong in those places.
I realized kind of like when you look at what your core values are and what is most important to you, I would probably say the single thing, there are two that are right up there at the top. And one of them is freedom, but I think it's because of what happened, and just that was, I want to feel, I think freedom almost feels like safety to me, that I know I can take care of myself. But the other one that's so big is loyalty. Like loyalty for me is everything. And when I really look at now, like my family, it's a little like my family is this little family that I've kind of cobbled together of friends and family members and ex-husband and all of that. But yes, I have. I kind of go along and kind of cobble together people, and I just watch for the loyalty, because I think that is such a key thing.
Has any of this made its way into your work, even around weight loss? Because my understanding is that from the outside looking in, JJ, like you've even intentionally created this community very much with the values of loyalty in the communities that you have been a part of creating.
This last year has become like, I've become a meditator and a yogi. And I was sitting in meditation, and the thing that came out with where I needed to go next in business was to double down in community. That's really is what's going to save us all right now, right? Is just having community. So what happens when you have community? Well, you have to have common goals and common values. And so like in my community for health and wellness, it's really like, don't judge, be supportive, be kind, don't be mean. Like those, and I have so little tolerance for any of that type of stuff, even though I know, when you see it, that it's just coming from someone who's hurt, because it happens every time, like hurt people, right? But still, they're not going to hurt people on my watch.
A couple questions that are coming up, but I'll start with this one, JJ, is what would you want people to understand about those in their life who may have been adopted?
I'll tell you what's always irritated me. Dr. Laura.
Mhm.
Because Dr. Laura's easy answer for anything, if someone got, she'd call it knocked up, which I find so offensive. Like, so offensive. Like, anyone would ever have sex before marriage. It's like, welcome to the real world. And they got knocked up, like, offensive. And, and that if you weren't married, you had to give that child up. And, I just disagree completely that that's always the best solution. Like, you have to look at the right solution. Like, when my birth mom refused to give me to my birth father's mother who wanted to raise me. And I keep going, well, I don't think you had the right to make that decision. That wasn't yours to make. Like, if blood relatives want to keep you, I think that's probably the smarter thing. But I think for parents adopting, I just think you have to be very, very open about everything. When I was 25 and I found my birth parents, I sat down to tell my parents about it. And when I sat down to tell my parents about it, it was to tell them I wasn't looking for, like, I wasn't looking to replace you. I was looking to understand me. Like, you are my parents. You're my parents. They are not my parents. But I needed to know more about myself that you'll never understand if you're not adopted. You've got this whole mystery world out there that you don't know where nowadays it's like I look at 23andMe every week to see if I've got someone new. And I actually do. I finally found my half niece, but you can't understand that if you're not adopted. And my dad, we're sitting at a dinner at a very expensive restaurant, a very quiet restaurant. And my dad called me a bitch, a selfish bitch. And the waiters all surrounded the table because it was a very expensive, very quiet restaurant. My dad is now calling me a selfish bitch. But my dad loved my mom like more than, he modeled like what it's like for someone to be fully loved. Like, my dad loved my mom. And so anything that was a threat to my mom's happiness, my dad was going after. So he saw this as a threat. And what I didn't know growing up was that my parents, it was funny, my parents were always watching, especially my mom when she was at Park or anywhere else, if someone was paying too much attention to me. Turns out I had a whole set of family that lived near where we lived that were always looking. So, it's kind of interesting when you hear it all later. But, all I know is I was called a bitch. And when I'm trying to explain to them why I did it and, how I feel about them and how much I appreciate them, and that's happening. So that's a very good example of what not to do. Now, what they did early on, I think that one of the worst things you could ever do is try to hide this stuff. Like, you hear those stories and someone didn't know they were adopted and they find out like age 30, like, you want to screw someone up, do that. Don't do that. So telling me as early as possible so that it just was something I always knew is fantastic. But I also think you need to, as an adopted parent, read the books like Primal Wound, understand where the child was coming from, and do everything you can to make them feel completely loved. Like, never throw that "I'll give you back" card at them, because they'll never let it go ever, because they already think that. Like, core in there
already their biggest fear.
Our biggest fear is that you're going to throw us back, give us back. We have nowhere. We're left on the street, and that we're not lovable. So any evidence of that, even the slightest bit, we're taking it in.
Last question, JJ. For those people who have been adopted, what words of advice might you give those who might be on the same path of self-discovery, and it's taking a long time and there's waves that come through? And
I love the statement that Dr. Joe says about having compassion and care for yourself. It was really clear for me. So this last time I went to one of his events, he does this coherence healing where a group of 8 goes around you and they basically use energy to heal you. It sounds woo, I know, when you're hearing it from here, but there's a ton of science behind it. And I got chosen, and I'm like, no. Like, there are people in wheelchairs. I'm totally fine. Like, I've got my foot hurts. That's about it. Right. And they're like, no. We chose you for a reason. I'm like, because it's a pretty vulnerable situation to be in, needless to say. But what came out of that was so clear that, I had a broken heart. And you kind of look at it and go, my birth mom had a broken heart. I had a broken heart. My adopted mom, we had a broken heart, not able to have kids. It's like, and, I had to heal that broken heart, which was why it took me so long to find really the love of my life, because I had a broken heart, and now I can set about healing that heart, because you can't be everything out there. Like if you're coming from a place of pain and that's how you're making your success, you'll never feel successful and you'll never be happy with it. And you'll always keep going for the next thing. And the next thing won't do anything for you either, right? You could have a million gold records. It wouldn't matter. You still have a broken heart. So just have compassion for yourself. You're gonna go through those things. And, it's like, as unbelievable as it sounds that someone has to love you more to adopt you, it actually is true. It's really hard to adopt kids,
Well, thank you, JJ. Appreciate you sharing so openly with us. And thank you for tuning into this episode of the Biology of Trauma podcast. If you would like to know more about attachment, then I have lots of resources for you in the show notes. I will include the link to my attachment pain quiz. Do you have an attachment pain? Maybe which one is what I should be asking, because there are 6 different attachment pains and we usually have a primary one at different stages of our life. You can find that out on the attachment pain quiz. I also have an attachment pain mini course, a 5-video series where I teach on each of the attachment pains and how they become our biology and what biology, beliefs, and health conditions is associated with each. I also have an attachment trauma roadmap, a free guide on what is attachment trauma so that you can know if you or your patients or clients have attachment trauma. It is a unique type of trauma to work with and to reprogram because of how early it happened. And so I provide this roadmap for all the pieces that are needed for that journey. I have some related podcast episodes that you will want to check out. Episode 59 was on adoption trauma, the myth of resilience, with author Robin Carr Morse. Episode 92 was on how chaos of early childhood trauma affects our adult nervous system. And that is with my good friend, Dr. Tion Dayton. There's a few YouTube videos that you might want to check out. One is what you need to do first before processing your childhood trauma. Just because we know we've got some things to process does not mean it's the right time. We need some skills first, and I go into that in that video. And then I don't know if you know this, but I actually started working with adoptive families and their adopted children, either from the foster care system or from around the world. And I have shared a video here, which is many of them sharing their experience of what it was like to be an adoptive parent of a child who had lots of trauma and what that process was to try to reach their heart. If you are ready to actually get started with opening up and repairing childhood wounds and attachment pains, again, please lay your foundation first. You need to have tools and skills to work with and through your nervous system, and I can help you do that through the 6-week online foundational journey course. This contains both live classes and video guided exercises, and I guide you how to create inner safety and have the skills for the deeper work. Don't forget, our biology will also be an important piece for repairing attachment. And as always, I am here to save you time and money by bringing you practical information that will help you accelerate the trauma healing journey. So please take a moment to subscribe, rate, or leave a review. Your feedback is how I know how to improve this podcast, bring you great content, and help others find information that can change their life as well. I'm your host, Dr. Aimie. Until next episode, lots of love.